This is the second origin you are going to fall in love with and one that you will be enjoying for the rest of your coffee career. It's an origin that has a tradition of very solid, good washed coffees that are easy to roast and offer you a nice cup profile, but also very consistent cup profile. But in addition to that, it's one of the most innovative origins where they have a lot of coffees of the highest quality, but also with cup profiles that are uncomparable to any other coffees out there. Curious? I'm Ingo from Roastables, and now let's go. When you start your journey into coffee, then there are usually two routes people are taking. The most common one is coming from Brazilian beans like Brazil. They offer these chocolate nut profiles, and then you start to like this one, and then you want to be more experimental and learn other origins. Or then another route is naturals from Ethiopia, which are giving then really a funky flavor. People realize what there's also about in coffee, and then they start to discover from that. And then usually one of the second origins you dive into will be Colombian coffees. Colombia is one of the countries with the longest coffee tradition. They offer very good quality, and in this video we are going to deep dive into coffee production, coffees from Colombia, about the history of the coffee in Colombia. We talk about the different regions and their cup profile so that you can discover then the coffees you like most. But we will be also talking about how to roast coffee from Colombia. But now let's start with the question, why is actually Colombia such an approachable origin? The reason for that is that Colombia has a tradition of very good quality washed coffees that offer some nice floral, beautiful aspects, but are still then also approachable by a wide range of people. And these coffees are also quite easy to roast. They are quite consistent in roasting, so people get nice experiences, nice results out of it, and then enjoy a nice cup of coffee. This can be a bit a lighter roast or a darker roast. But what's happening in Colombia now is that a lot of farms are then getting into experimental processings. They discover new qualities, work around with different beans, and we are going now to take a look at the history and tradition, and then also about the movements that we have in coffee production in Colombia. Coffee is said to have arrived in Colombia in the beginning of the 18th century, where then Jesuits have been bringing the coffee over from Venezuela, and people have started to grow coffee. So there are the first traces around 1730, 1740, where we find then proofs of coffee that has been grown there. It took then about 100 years until coffee was so developed that it started to be exported. So the first exports, they have left Colombia around 1830 in this region. And then at the start of the 20th century, coffee has been the main export good from Colombia, the biggest crop that they have there. And the structure of that was usually then in families. So you have a lot of family farms. This is a structure that you still have. So you still don't find these really, really big companies like in other regions, like for example in Brazil. It's still very much then in family farms, like for example the farms that we know here over in Germany or Switzerland, where you have then the families that are growing their crops. And this is actually something that is then beautiful also if you want to start to get into direct trade, for example, because you can really then trace the coffee, you know where it's coming from, you can communicate with the families. They speak Spanish, so often even then English, but there is a good possibility to communicate with the people, even maybe know then on which lot of the farm the coffee is coming from. And this is why then you have then really a strong relationship or strong traces then very often between roasteries and farmers when it comes to Colombian coffees. About another 100 years later, so in the 1930s, the Colombian Coffee Federation have been developed, and now they have then really been supportive to the farmers when it comes to developing crops, qualities, and then also support them in exporting. So therefore, there has been then a really strong industry when it comes to coffee production, coffee exporting in Colombia. They have then also developed the character of Juan Valdez in the 50s, 60s. And then the sign of 100% coffee from Colombia has really become a quality sign. So for a long time, people have then bought coffee where it says 100% Colombian coffee and knew this is going to be a coffee that is of really high quality. Now we talked about Colombian coffee a bit like it was one, but actually the different regions are quite different in their characteristic, in the height, and then also in the sensory quality. So when you deep dive into an origin like Colombia, you might also want to like to have a look at different regions. And I'm going to showcase you now 6 of the most common coffee regions in Colombia so that you know a little bit what to expect from where. So the Andean mountain range, which is going through Colombia, then really shapes these different regions. And if you start to deep dive now into some, we start with Huila, which you might have also already heard. The height, the altitude is about 1,300 to 2,000 meters. They have a lot of Caturra, Castillo, Bourbon, but more and more than also Tabi or geisha coffees coming from there when you then want to develop some particular flavor profiles. It's actually Colombia's highest volume region, and you get here coffees of a nice sweetness, a nice balance, and you have then also these red fruit notes that are sometimes really particular for a lot of people when they are talking about Colombian coffees. Second region is Nariño. This is then really high. It's about 1,800 to 2,100 meters. So you get then really highly grown coffees. You usually have Castura, Típica, Castillo coffees. You have really bright acidity, citrus and stone fruit notes. Sometimes through the elevation also a little bit of winey notes due to the high proximity to the equator and also the high altitudes that you have here. Then Tolima, also quite a famous region, is located around 1,200 and 2,000 meters above sea level. They have Caturra, Castillo, Típica are like the most common crops that you find in this region. They have quite high volumes that they produce, and then usually they're quite full-bodied. They have this balanced sweetness, some chocolatey notes. There are also more and more than specialty growers, but this is kind of the most common profile here with this high sweetness, body and chocolatey notes that you find them particularly in the Tolima region. Cauca is also quite high, between 1,700 and 2,200 meters above sea level. You very often find here Caturra, Castillo, Bourbon crops. So the profile here is they have vibrant acidity, it's quite juicy, it's quite fruit forward, and then they have also a strong community of cooperation and smallholder farmers that are working together and that are then also developing specialty lots. One coffee we are offering is the San Sebastian, a washed coffee from Colombia, which is coming from this region and which is actually one of the most beautiful coffees I had, with a beautiful note of green apple. There's some orange, also citrusy notes, some caramel sweetness. So if ever you're interested in that, have a look here or down in the description and look for our San Sebastian from Colombia. Antioquia is a little bit lower. It's between 1,300 and 2,000 meters above sea level. Traditionally, they have Caturra, Colombia, which is then also a variety that has been developed in Colombia, especially then to fight against the coffee rust, which is always a threat in the coffee-producing countries. They have also Castillo there. And the profile here is mild, sweet, is well-rounded, so a really approachable coffee for a lot of people, and a broad range of people can roast it a bit lighter, but also then go a little bit in the more darker roasting side with these coffees from Antioquia. And then there is the coffee axis of Caldas, Risaralda and Quindío, which is then also a very common and very popular region to get coffee from. So the altitude is between 1,200 and 2,000 meters above sea level. The three regions are a little bit different than in their characteristic, but you can say in general they have Caturra, they have Castillo, also the Colombian crop, Típica, but more and more than also crops like Tabi or geisha that is being grown there, and especially for the specialty market. Typically the coffees here are quite sweet, very balanced, they have a mild acidity, but then particularly when it comes to Quindío, it often has then also a quite high brightness and florality. So you get a lot of these crops and also especially in Quindío. And the one coffee that we have from the region of Quindío is, for example, then the washed peach. So this peach co-fermented coffee, which is then quite a different coffee. You find also a video right here, or then more about the coffee in the description. So this is then more the new wave of coffee in Colombia, where you then not only have these classic washed coffees, but also fermentations like anaerobic fermentation, experimental fermentations, or then even co-fermentations like the one coffee that we are offering, this peach fermented coffee from Quindío. So in general, when people are talking about Colombian coffees and they get these coffees that are then related to this 100% Colombian quality design, then you often get like mid-roast, you get then coffees with a nice sweetness, a nice balance, medium to bright acidity, and typically then often these notes of red berries and some citrus notes. This is kind of the classic Colombian profile people are thinking about traditionally. But now more and more also due to the structure that you have in Colombia with these local farms, with quite small producers that have then also connection directly to roasteries, importers, a relation to the competition scene. You get a lot of innovation happening in Colombia. So people are more and more than experimenting with different fermentations. So I mean, not only then honey fermentations that have been developed, but now also anaerobic fermentation, carbonic maceration, yeast fermentations, like temperature shock fermentations, or then also co-fermentations that are developing really new ways of coffee taste descriptions, taste flavors. So they're very innovative in that. They invest a lot and they have then really good technology to good quality, so that you find a lot of interesting coffees that are really then different from what you have been drinking before, or then also different from the classic Colombian profile that you have been drinking before. We'll then later be talking about how to roast coffees from Colombia, but there I will be more than talking about the classic wash profile, because the more and more coffee is then fermented, or the more that has been happening with the coffee after the processing or after the harvest, the more difficult it is to roast these coffees then to their best expression. But we are going then to talk about the classic processing, like these classic washed coffees from Colombia. But before we do that, we are going to talk about something that is particular for Colombia when it comes then also to quality and production of coffee, or also then other agricultural goods, because Colombia is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. Some people say it's the second most biodiverse country in the world after Brazil. So it has really a huge biodiversity. It has a lot of different species when it comes to plants, animals, and so on. And when it comes to coffee production, it's also still, as said, it's these family farms, but they often have then different crops there. They not only have coffee, they also have, for example, fruits or other agricultural products. On one hand, for their own food security, so that they have something to eat, but then also to be a bit less dependent on, for example, coffee prices, or what can happen if coffee rust is going to destroy a crop, so that they have then also other things that they are growing on the farm, have a bit more security and more diversity on their farm. So you have a high biodiversity, not only in general in the country, but very often then also on the coffee farms. And this is, by the way, something that's funny. I recently had then Juan, a coffee producer from Colombia that we've been working with for quite some time with me. And then we've been talking about it. They said that on their farm, they have between the coffee farms very often mangoes. And the neighbor, which is then really side by side of them, have papayas between their coffee trees. And they cupped the coffee side by side and then really could taste quite a remarkable difference in the coffee quality, or in the coffee cup that they have been cupping. That's quite interesting then how other crops can influence and also the taste of the coffee. But what comes in addition is that you have a lot of different microclimates in Colombia. So it can be that one part is a bit more raining than the other. So you have quite a variety of then different microclimates, and then therefore also quality when it comes to farm from one region. Therefore, it's really interesting then to deep dive into that country and then try coffees from different regions, but also different producers, maybe even different lots of a farm. That's quite an interesting thing to do in this origin. So let's have a look on how to roast coffees from Colombia. And as I told you before, we are first going to have a look at the classic wash profile. So what I would recommend you at the beginning is to take coffee like a Castillo, Caturra or Bourbon coffee, a washed classic coffee from Colombia, because here you have a nice windows of sweetness. They are quite forgiving and they are then quite easy to roast to get a nice profile out of it. I would recommend you in general to roast this coffee either lighter if you're drinking filter coffee, or then medium light if you go into the espresso profiles. Don't roast them too dark because they have then really a quite particular taste profile that you would lose if you roast them too dark. If you're too light, as always, then you're tending to be a bit in the grassy notes. But these coffees, they have quite a nice range of lightness or darkness that you can target. And now let's talk about the coffee that you would do as a filter coffee. And here I would then target the coffee in the regions of, let's say, 13–14% weight loss, so that you get then the clarity, the nice profiles out of it, but still has then a little bit of body and balance, that you're not too light, not too dark. So I will go in a coffee that targets around 13–14% weight loss. And what I would recommend you in Colombian coffees is that you give them enough energy so you can roast them quite quickly because they're high grown, they are quite dense, but they are not as dense as, for example, African beans. So don't be too high with the temperatures. If you are working, for example, with an Aillio bullet, just to give you an understanding, I would target maybe like 280 degrees. With the bullets, with other beans, you can go up to 310. So for other roasters, just for you to know, maybe let's say about, 85% of the maximum temperature that you get as a start temperature. And then also when you start the roast, give enough energy, but not too hot. So for the bullet, I would then go, for example, with a heat setting of 8, not 9. Give them enough energy, but don't put the burner like on 100% and then really give them the highest level of energy. I would then target to get into the yellowing at around 4 minutes 45 in the drum roaster, and then targets to reach first crack around 8 minutes 30. It can be a bit like up to 9 minutes, but around 8 minutes 30 is a nice point for these coffees to reach first crack. And then maybe do a 1 minute 30 development phase, so that at the end you will be landing at around 10 minutes of roast. You should then get a really nice, not too light, but still quite light coffee. When you're reaching then first crack with your roaster, you can still lift the burner a little bit higher than with other beans because of their structure. When they're washed, they can hold the temperature quite nicely. And then when you're then in the development phase, you can take the burner a little bit back and then develop it until this point that I said, which is about 10 minutes. Then you should get a nice roast. And from there, you can then, of course, then develop your roast, make it a bit lighter, make it a bit darker, change the settings a little bit, and play around with the settings that you like. So where to go from there? These washed coffees from Colombia, actually coffees that you can drink really every day and maybe then also for the rest of your life. But once you want to get a little bit more into the experimental side or other flavors that the country can develop or offer you, make sure you have a look at anaerobic fermented coffees. Make sure you have a look at carbonic maceration, maybe then even yeast fermentation, where then completely new flavors are being produced, or a coffee like the one we are offering, which is then anaerobic fermented, but then also co-fermented with slices of peach, so that you get then really a crazy and then strong pronounced peach flavor out of it. So you can see there is a lot to discover in Colombia. I also hope you like this video. By the way, if you like it, then put a like down there or a subscription, because then I know which kind of content, which kind of videos you like, and can do more of this in the future. But beside of that, if you're interested in coffee roasting, if you're interested in green coffee beans, coffee roasting equipment, or also knowledge about coffee roasting, then make sure you head over to our website, roasttravels.com, where we offer coffee roasting equipment. We ship them all over Europe, green coffee beans from all different origins, but then also a lot of knowledge and information about coffee roasting. I'm Ingo from Roast Travels, and I wish you now a beautiful day and a beautiful cup of coffee.